we're going to talk a little bit about music from the Renaissance period, which runs from about 1400 to 1600. So this is one of our longer periods of time. We know a good bit about music from the Renaissance period, but again, it's not something you're going to hear a lot in concert. It's just not as big an audience for that as music from later style periods. So what do we know about music from the period? One is that church music from this period is almost always a cappella. A cappella. That means, cappella means chapel, so it's like at church. That's basically what that means. But what a cappella music is voices only. There are no instruments. So whereas today you think of church music and you may think of anything from organ to a praise band, depending on what kind of church experience you have, at this period of time, it would be all vocal. So lots of wonderful music from that period of time. In fact, choral groups still do a lot of this music because it is a wonderful opportunity to focus on really listening to each other. You don't have instruments to help you stay on pitch, so you have to really focus on that. So church music, mostly a cappella. If it's not church music, or what we would call secular music as opposed to sacred music for church, it might be a cappella, but chances are that there would be instruments involved in that. That's about function. A lot of music would have been used for festivals, dancing, parties, just entertainment. And if you're having entertainment, you can have some more instruments going with it. This is the first period of time where we also really think about solo instrumental music. When we looked at that early music instrumental groups, we saw groups of musicians, so they were playing together for the most part. But in the Renaissance period, we start to see the solo musician as a factor. Part of that is because this is the period of time when we have the troubadours and the trouvères and all those people traveling about with your sort of basic street corner musicians where they would just set up and perform. So if you can do it by yourself, then whatever money gets thrown into your hat, you don't have to share, I guess. So there's probably some financial incentive for being a solo musician. So the instruments that we could play that way would be things like the lute, where you could play melody and play your own harmony. So that's more interesting for the audience. We also start to see keyboard instruments appearing at this period of time. Obviously, you're not going to sit on the corner with your keyboard instrument. That's not too practical. But we do have some small, they actually had little portable keyboards. They're not pianos yet. They're not even harpsichords yet. They're very small keyboards, limited range, limited sound possibilities. They can't play very loudly. But we do have literature for those kinds of instruments, so you might actually hear those performed in events. Now, when we were in the earlier period of time, if you wanted to write the ideal piece of music, religiously speaking here, which was what most music was at the time, then you would write it in triple meter. Think about that. Why would religious music focus on triple meter? You know your church history. The obvious answer is triple equals the Trinity. So triple meter was considered perfect if you were an early musician. So if you were going to write perfect music, you would write it in triple meter. Here's your little historic sidelight for that. So on the music, when they wrote it, to indicate it was triple meter, they didn't put 3/4 like we would today. They just drew a circle, because a circle is perfect. And that would indicate triple meter. So when we went away from triple meter, as we start to see in the Renaissance, they cut that circle in half. What does that leave us? A C. And if you've taken music lessons, you know that C stands for 4/4 time. And if you put a line through it like this, then you get cut time. So it all comes from that circle, from our perfect triple meter way back, went to not so perfect, and then we cut that in half. So there's a little thing you can dazzle your friends with, or maybe answer a question on Jeopardy one day. So now we're going into duple meter because we're not so interested in making the perfect church piece of music anymore. Obviously, church music is still there. It's very important. But the perfect is not so much an issue. Another thing that we start to see in vocal music, which is really interesting, is what we call word painting. Word painting. So what that is that you're singing along and you have a text. The text has some meaning. What a composer would try to do is to write the music so that it would illustrate the text. So let's say that we have written a lovely song about falling in love. Lots of those, they go back forever. Love songs are eternal. So we might sing, oh, I'm falling in love. You would fall on the falling sound. The sound would go down to match the word. Or if we were singing about something rising up, the pitch would go up and up and up and up. Those are obvious examples. Some of them are really subtle. One of my favorites is a piece called Oi May, which just means alas. And so it's this sad, this person is having tragedy. And all through this piece, every time the word Oi May comes along, it's like, Oi May, Oi May. It just sounds sad. Like, oh, I can't bear anymore. They wrote it into the music that way. They might also take a word like thousand in Italian, mille, and they would say mille, 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 and repeat it over and over and over. So you got the sense of thousandness. So sometimes it's a really obvious word painting. Sometimes it's a little more subtle like that. So as we listen to music from this period and all the way through the next 150 years or so, that's a pretty common technique. So you can start to listen for that. Of course, it's tricky because a lot of the music is in a foreign language, so you really have to pay attention to what the original word was so you know that they are now singing about that so you can get the translation. So let's look at a couple of pieces that actually put all these bits together. One of the really important vocal kinds of works from this period of time is called a motet. It actually has been going along for a while now. We had this in the earlier period. As I said when we talked about O Splendidissima Gemma, what they would do is take an existing line of some kind of music and add other lines of music to it. They got a little crazy with that sometimes. What we will see sometimes in these motets from the medieval period is that you might have a chant line at the bottom that would be, some holy text about, Christ have mercy on us or whatever. But then the two texts above it might be telling some really bawdy story or talking about some man chasing a woman around her desk, to put it in a sort of modern context. So you could have really contradictory kind of ideas going in these texts. So, and they might not even be singing the same text. You could have three different texts being sung simultaneously, which you think, how on earth did anybody know what was going on? Well, maybe they didn't really need to know what was going on. Maybe it's just all about the sound. So we're going to listen to a medieval motet, and I'm just going to let you do that on your own time, that shows you three lines and even has the music there for you so you can see the notation. You can see how everybody's just going their own way. It's in French. The translation is not really important because we don't care whether they're singing racy things. It is something about love because it's got the word amour in there, and we know that that's a love word in French. So listen to that and then come back and we will look at this motet in the Renaissance period. So when we get to the Renaissance motet, it's going to be religious. Earlier period, it could be anything. In fact, there are lots of fun books full of those things where they do fun things like where the lines sort of feed into each other, and in each line individually looks really innocent, but then you put them together and you get something completely racy. But then the Renaissance period, we're going to swing back the other way. We're going to be a little bit more religious about it. So the Renaissance motet is a religious work. What we'll have in this is at least one text, just one text, and it's going to be in Latin. And we know it's religious, right? We're singing in Latin. The example that I have given to you is by a French composer named Josquin des Prez. He was a composer in the French court, but he also worked at the papal court in Rome, so he obviously had really strong religious connections. So he got both the secular world and the religious world to work in. The piece that we're going to listen to by him is called Gaude Virgo, which it's in praise of Mary, in praise of the Virgin. So again, we're looking at that whole Marian approach to worship. And I've given you a hyperlink for the translation so you'll know what they're singing about. You can listen for the word Gaude as it comes around every time because it happens quite a lot. And that'll help you keep track of where you are in the text. So we're listening to this. Remember that it's a cappella, so there won't be any instruments. You might listen to see what kind of meter it's in. And we know that it's going to be polyphonic texture because we've got all these different lines going together. Remember that this is the period of time when painters first started to figure out how to make paintings have perspective. So our musicians are really just following along with their painter brothers and sisters in developing this new technique. So listen to the medieval motet and then listen to the Renaissance motet and see how things have advanced in just a few short years.